I never signed this.
Then someone did it for you.
The court will inspect Box 114B.
Understood, Your Honor.
Mr. Johnson, present the key.
Your Honor.
Bradley Foster was 38, a quiet structural engineer in Columbus, Ohio. Most people believed he was simply an ordinary husband with an ordinary paycheck, the kind of man who never questioned anyone. He drove the same aging Ford F-150, packed his own lunch every morning, and had just emptied nearly every dollar of his savings to pay $187,000 for his mother-in-law Evelyn Harper's emergency surgery. What nobody knew was that Bradley trusted evidence more than words. Then, outside Evelyn's hospital room, he heard her whisper to his wife, Julia, "Leave him before he learns the truth." Bradley's fingers froze around the medical folder as the paper slowly slipped toward the polished floor. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, leave a comment with your country and your local time. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach. And if you enjoy slow-burn mysteries built on evidence instead of luck, subscribe now so you won't miss tomorrow's story. Bradley Foster did not sleep that night. He lay awake in the guest chair beside Julia's hospital room until dawn washed pale orange light across the parking garage outside Riverside Methodist Hospital. Julia had fallen asleep after nearly 30 hours of fear, exhaustion, and relief. Her mother, Evelyn Harper, had survived surgery that no insurance company had agreed to cover. The bill had arrived before the operation even began. $187,412. Bradley had wired the money without asking for another opinion. He never mentioned that the transfer had emptied nearly every investment account he had outside his retirement fund. No speeches, no complaints, just a signature. That was who Bradley Foster had always been. He believed problems existed to be solved, not discussed. At 38, Bradley worked as a senior structural engineer at Morrison & Keene Engineering in downtown Columbus, Ohio. His office overlooked the Scioto River, but he rarely noticed the view. His desk stayed almost unnaturally organized. Every blueprint sat inside labeled folders. Every notebook carried dates, project numbers, and color-coded tabs. Coworkers often joked that Bradley could probably tell if a bridge was unsafe just by listening to it. He usually smiled, then returned to work. People mistook his silence for simplicity. They assumed quiet men rarely noticed details. They were wrong. Engineering had trained Bradley to distrust assumptions. Steel either carried a load or it failed. Concrete either cracked or it didn't. Feelings never changed mathematics. That habit followed him home. Receipts were filed, taxes finished months early, home maintenance recorded in spreadsheets, every appliance warranty scanned into cloud storage. Julia teased him about it. If civilization collapses? She often laughed. You'll still know where every instruction manual is? He always answered with the same calm grin. Probably. Their marriage had lasted 12 years because their personalities balanced one another. Julia Foster was 36. She worked as a program director for a nonprofit organization, partnered with several Columbus hospitals, helping low-income patients navigate insurance appeals and rehabilitation services. She loved conversations. Bradley loved solutions. She filled every room with energy. He made every room feel steady. Friends described them as opposites. Bradley simply believed they trusted each other. That was enough. His relationship with Evelyn Harper had never been particularly warm. It wasn't openly hostile, just carefully polite. Evelyn had always preferred louder men, men who drove expensive German cars, men who interrupted conversations, men who wore tailored suits even to backyard cookouts. Bradley usually arrived wearing clean jeans, work boots, and a plain navy polo. Evelyn once introduced him at Thanksgiving by saying, "This is Bradley. He builds things." She neglected to mention he managed multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects across Ohio. Bradley never corrected her. Titles meant very little to him. Results mattered. When Evelyn collapsed from a ruptured abdominal aneurysm 3 nights earlier, nobody had cared about appearances. The ambulance reached Riverside in 11 minutes. The surgeons estimated less than an hour before irreversible damage. Insurance denied emergency authorization because of an administrative dispute involving policy reinstatement. The hospital demanded immediate financial guarantees. Julia broke down. Evelyn drifted in and out of consciousness. Bradley stepped into a consultation room, called his financial advisor, liquidated 2 investment accounts, and authorized the transfer. 43 minutes later, surgery began. He had saved her life. Then he heard those words outside her hospital room. Leave him before he learns the truth. He replayed them constantly. Not once had he wondered whether he misunderstood. Evelyn's voice had been clear. The sentence itself wasn't. What truth about what his marriage money? Something from before he met Julia. He considered asking Julia immediately. The opportunity appeared several times, while driving home, while making coffee, while sitting beside her hospital bed. Each time he stopped himself. Questions asked too early often produced rehearsed answers. Engineers investigated failures before assigning causes. People deserved the same courtesy. So Bradley said nothing. Instead, he watched, very quietly. On Friday afternoon, Julia left the hospital cafeteria carrying 2 coffees. Bradley remained in Evelyn's room while she was gone. Evelyn smiled weakly from her bed. "I still owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," Bradley replied. "I couldn't let you die." She studied him longer than seemed comfortable. There was gratitude in her expression. Something else hid behind it. Fear. It disappeared almost immediately. "You've always been the good husband." Bradley nodded politely. "Thank you." Nothing more. He didn't mention the hallway. Didn't mention what he'd heard. When Julia returned, the conversation shifted toward physical therapy schedules and discharge planning. Bradley noticed something small. Julia normally placed her phone face up on tables. Now she kept turning it over, screen down, every time. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Saturday morning, Bradley arrived before visiting hours. He brought Evelyn fresh clothes from her house. Julia had given him the garage code. Inside the Harper residence, everything appeared exactly as he remembered. Neatly arranged, dust-free, almost staged. Bradley packed a small overnight bag. While searching a bedroom closet for slippers, he noticed a locked gray filing cabinet. He remembered seeing it years earlier. Nothing unusual. Still, something caught his attention. A thin layer of dust covered the cabinet, except around the handle. Someone had opened it recently. Very recently. He simply noted the observation. Nothing else. Back at the hospital, discharge paperwork occupied most of the afternoon. Julia stepped outside twice to answer phone calls. Both conversations ended quickly. Each time she returned, looking distracted. Bradley didn't interrupt. Instead, he focused on forms, insurance, medication schedules, follow-up appointments, physical therapy referrals. Everything received copies. Everything went into labeled folders. By evening, Evelyn was resting comfortably. Julia sat beside the window, scrolling through her phone. Bradley walked to the vending machines. On the way back, he rounded the hallway corner just as Julia hurriedly locked her phone screen. A notification had flashed across it for less than a second. The sender's name wasn't visible, only part of the message. Delete the older calls. Julia looked up immediately. You scared me. Sorry. You've been quiet. Tired. She smiled. Me too. Nothing about her expression suggested guilt, only exhaustion. That unsettled Bradley even more. If there truly was a secret, Julia either hid it exceptionally well, or she genuinely didn't understand it herself. Late Sunday morning, Evelyn was discharged. Bradley drove separately so Julia could help her mother settle back into her home in Upper Arlington. After carrying groceries inside, Bradley repaired a loose porch railing without being asked. Then he fixed a sticking kitchen cabinet. Old habits. Before leaving, Evelyn hugged him longer than usual. "Thank you again." Bradley returned the hug. "Get some rest." Her hands trembled slightly, not from surgery, from something else. He noticed, he always noticed. That evening, Julia showered while Bradley cleaned the kitchen. Her phone vibrated on the countertop. He had never searched through her messages, never wanted to. Trust wasn't built by surveillance. But as he reached to move the phone away from spilled water, the screen lit up. A notification disappeared almost instantly. No message preview. Only one line remained visible. Call history updated. Seconds later, Julia rushed from the hallway, picked up the phone, and without realizing Bradley had seen the screen, she quietly opened her recent calls, one by one. She began deleting every record from the previous 2 days. Bradley did not say a word when Julia finished deleting the call history. He simply reached for a dish towel, wiped the water from the countertop, and returned to loading the dishwasher. Julia smiled. "Thanks for cleaning." "No problem." The conversation ended there. Later that evening, after Julia had fallen asleep, Bradley sat alone on the back patio overlooking their quiet neighborhood in Dublin, just northwest of Columbus. The July air carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and sprinklers clicked rhythmically across neighboring lawns. He replayed everything in order: Evelyn's whispered warning, Julia's hidden phone calls, the deleted records. 3 isolated facts, no conclusions. He had spent 15 years calculating structural failures. One missing bolt never explained a collapsed bridge. Failures came from chains of events. People were no different. Monday morning, Bradley returned to Morrison and Keene Engineering. The office buzzed with discussions about a new interstate overpass outside Dayton. His project manager, Daniel Mercer, leaned against Bradley's office door. "You look terrible." "Hospital." "Your mother-in-law." "She's recovering." Daniel nodded. "Take another day if you need it." Bradley appreciated the offer, but declined. Routine helped him think. For the next 4 hours, he reviewed bridge calculations with his usual precision, yet a small notebook remained open beside his keyboard. Every unusual observation from the past week found its way onto one page. No interpretations. Only facts. Friday, Evelyn's statement. Saturday, locked filing cabinet recently opened. Sunday, Julia deleted recent calls. Bradley believed memory became unreliable the moment emotions entered. Written observations did not. At lunch, he drove to Riverside Methodist Hospital not to visit Evelyn, but to collect several billing statements that Julia had forgotten to request. Hospital administration occupied the 3rd floor. A billing coordinator named Rachel Simmons recognized him immediately. "Mr. Foster, thank you again for helping your mother-in-law." Bradley smiled politely. "I just need copies of everything." Rachel printed nearly 40 pages. As Bradley organized the paperwork, one document caught his attention. The admission timestamp showed Evelyn arriving at 7:18 p.m. Another page recorded an insurance verification attempt at 7:24. Nothing unusual. Then he noticed something else. A handwritten notation near the bottom. Outside representative notified prior to authorization. No name, no department, no explanation. Bradley looked up. "What does this note mean?" Rachel adjusted her glasses. "I'm honestly not sure." Would someone normally be notified before payment approval? Usually only if there's a legal representative or financial advocate already on file. Evelyn doesn't have one. Rachel frowned. Then it is unusual. She clicked through several screens on her computer. "Actually," she hesitated, "the electronic record doesn't identify who entered that note. It was added manually." "Looks that way." Bradley thanked her without asking another question. He wasn't trying to accuse anyone, only understand. Before leaving the hospital, he stopped at the rehabilitation department to confirm Evelyn's physical therapy schedule. The receptionist searched briefly. I'm sorry. What's wrong? It says the family declined rehabilitation. Bradley stared at her. The family, yes. It was canceled yesterday morning. Bradley frowned. No one discussed that with me. The receptionist shrugged apologetically. The cancellation came directly from the patient's authorized contact. Julia. I can't see the name. Only authorized contact. That surprised him. The vascular surgeon had emphasized rehabilitation during discharge. Skipping it increased complications. Evelyn had seemed determined to recover. Why refuse treatment? That afternoon, Bradley drove to Evelyn's house under the simple excuse of dropping off medication instructions. Julia wasn't there. Evelyn answered the door, slowly leaning on a walker. You didn't have to come. I was nearby. She invited him inside. The television played quietly in the background. A daytime courtroom program. Bradley handed her the folder. I stopped by the hospital. Oh, they said rehabilitation was canceled. A barely noticeable pause. I'm feeling stronger. The surgeon recommended it. I'll manage, Bradley nodded. If you're sure. Another pause. Then Evelyn changed the subject. How's work? Normally Bradley would have followed her lead. Today he simply observed. Her walker stood beside the couch, yet she never leaned on it while crossing the living room. Her movements were slow but steadier than she claimed. Not deception, just inconsistent. When Bradley left, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. A man wearing sunglasses remained inside, phone in hand, engine running. Perhaps waiting for someone, perhaps nothing. Still, Bradley noticed the license plate began with an Ohio government registration prefix. By Tuesday evening, another small inconsistency surfaced. Julia mentioned stopping by Evelyn's house after work. I made her dinner. What time, pour? Round 6. Bradley nodded. Later, while putting leftovers into the refrigerator, he casually asked, How was traffic, Nan? Horrible. Especially on Riverside Drive, Julia answered automatically. Except Evelyn didn't live anywhere near Riverside Drive. She lived off Tremont Road. Bradley said nothing. She didn't realize the mistake. Wednesday morning, he received an unexpected phone call. Is this Bradley Foster? Yes. My name is Harold Benton. The name meant nothing. I retired from Riverside Methodist 2 years ago. Bradley listened. I found your number because Rachel said you were asking questions about hospital billing. What can I help you with? Harold laughed softly. Actually, I may be able to help you. They met that afternoon at a small coffee shop near German Village. Harold looked nearly 70, neatly dressed, calm eyes, the kind of man who had spent decades behind paperwork instead of people. I heard your mother-in-law had insurance complications. She did. Harold stirred his coffee. Hospital systems aren't perfect. No system is. I reviewed thousands of emergency files before retirement. Bradley waited. Harold continued. When someone enters a manual financial notification before authorization, it's usually because another institution has already contacted the hospital. What kind of institution? A law office. Insurance investigator. Estate administrator. Occasionally a trust manager. Bradley's attention sharpened. Would family members know? Usually, but not always. Harold reached into his briefcase. I kept examples for training purposes. He unfolded several blank sample forms. One resembled the notation Bradley had seen. The code besides your mother-in-law's file? Harold pointed toward a printed example. Is almost never used for ordinary insurance. What is it used for? Protected financial interests. Bradley frowned, meaning, if someone has assets managed through legal structures that require notification before major medical expenses. Trusts, guardianships, estate restrictions, large settlements, Harold shrugged. I can't tell you which one. But it's definitely unusual. Bradley thanked him sincerely. The meeting had produced no proof, only direction. On Thursday evening, he returned to Evelyn's home while she attended a follow-up doctor's appointment with Julia. He wasn't searching the house. He had been asked to feed her golden retriever, Murphy. Inside, everything remained perfectly arranged. Bradley filled the dog's bowl, changed the water, collected the mail. As he placed several envelopes on the kitchen table, one slipped to the floor. He bent to retrieve it. Something else caught his eye. A family Bible rested on the bottom shelf beneath the table, apparently knocked sideways. Bradley reached down to straighten it. The book felt unusually heavy. When he lifted it, a small brass key slid from between the pages and landed on the hardwood floor with a sharp metallic click. Attached to the key was a faded paper tag. The handwriting had nearly disappeared. Only 3 words remained readable: First Federal Bank, safe deposit. Bradley turned the key over slowly in his hand. Old brass, years of wear, no modern barcode, no identifying number visible except a tiny engraved sequence beginning with 114. He stared at it for several seconds. Why would Evelyn hide a safe deposit key inside a family Bible instead of a desk drawer? More importantly, why had someone placed it there recently enough that it fell free the moment the Bible was moved? Bradley slipped the key into his pocket, just as headlights swept across the front windows. Julia's car had returned. Bradley slipped the brass key into his jacket pocket just before Julia unlocked the front door. Murphy trotted across the hardwood floor, wagging his tail, as if nothing unusual had happened. Julia balanced 2 grocery bags against her hip. You're already here. I came to feed Murphy. Thanks. She smiled naturally. No hesitation, no suspicion. Bradley took one of the bags from her hands and carried it into the kitchen. Evelyn followed several steps behind, moving carefully with her walker. Traffic was terrible, she muttered. Bradley nodded politely. I'll get dinner started. Nothing about the evening felt tense. That was precisely what made it unsettling. Everyone behaved as though life had returned to normal. Only Bradley knew it hadn't. The brass key rested in his pocket throughout dinner. He never touched it, never looked at it. He simply waited. Patience had become his greatest advantage. The following morning, Bradley left home 30 minutes earlier than usual. Instead of driving toward Morrison and Keene Engineering, he headed downtown. The faded paper tag attached to the key listed only 3 words: First Federal Bank. The original First Federal branch had closed years ago after a merger with Great Lakes Community Bank. Fortunately, archived branches often transferred old safe deposit records to their main office. At 8:15 a.m., Bradley walked into the marble lobby of Great Lakes Community Bank on High Street. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. A receptionist greeted him. Good morning. How may I help you? I need some information about an old safe deposit box. She examined the brass key. This is definitely one of ours, or one of First Federal's older boxes. Can you tell me who owns it? I'm afraid not, without proper identification or legal authority. Bradley expected that answer. I understand. The receptionist called over an older employee wearing a silver nameplate, Robert Gaines, 30 years with the bank. Robert studied the key more carefully. I haven't seen one of these in a long time. He turned it over. The numbering system changed in the late 90s. So it's old? Very. Can you at least tell me whether the box still exists? Robert hesitated. I shouldn't say much. Bradley waited silently. Silence often encouraged people to continue talking. Finally, Robert said, if the account remained active after the merger, it would now be stored in our archival vault. And if it wasn't active, it would have been surrendered according to Ohio law. Would this key still work? If the box still exists? Bradley thanked him and prepared to leave. One more thing, Robert added. Bradley turned. Boxes from that numbering series were almost always leased before electronic records. So, if you need ownership documentation, the county probate archives may help more than we can. Probate. The word stayed with Bradley throughout the morning. Back at his office, he finished reviewing bridge calculations before opening the Franklin County Public Records website. Property deeds, estate filings, probate indexes, everything searchable. He entered Evelyn Harper's name. Nothing unusual. Then he searched her maiden name, Evelyn Collins. Dozens of unrelated entries appeared. He refined the search. Nothing. Next, he searched the name of Evelyn's first husband, Michael Harper. One result appeared almost immediately. Estate case. Num 94 PB 11827, filed 29 years earlier. Bradley opened the public summary. Date of death, March 14th. Occupation, commercial electrician. Cause listed simply as workplace accident. The estate closed 9 months later. Routine. Except for one detail, a supplemental filing had been added nearly 2 years after probate officially ended. That almost never happened. Bradley requested certified copies online. Estimated processing time 3 business days. He leaned back in his chair. Whatever happened after Michael Harper's death hadn't ended with probate. Someone had returned to court. Why? That evening, Bradley stopped by the Franklin County Records Center on his way home. Much of the archive had been digitized, but older documents remained stored in climate-controlled rooms below ground level. A clerk named Denise Holloway greeted him. "What are you researching?" "Family history." "Technically true." She smiled. "We hear that a lot." Within 20 minutes, Denise wheeled out 3 gray archive boxes. White cotton gloves rested on top. "Please don't remove anything from the folders." Bradley nodded. The first box contained property records. The second held probate supplements. The third contained miscellaneous filings connected to Michael Harper's estate. Bradley carefully turned each page. Mortgage releases, tax statements, insurance correspondence, routine paperwork. Then he found something unexpected. A notice from the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. Wrongful death settlement. Confidential amount. Distribution approved by judicial order. Bradley's heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. Strong emotions narrowed judgment. He forced himself to read every line twice. The settlement existed. The amount remained sealed. Beneficiaries were partially redacted. One name, however, remained visible. Evelyn Harper. Another line referenced a minor child, initial only. J. Julia. Bradley frowned. Julia had once told him her father died in an electrical accident that left almost nothing behind except debt. That story no longer fit the paperwork. Wrongful death settlements involving negligence rarely ended with nothing. Especially not when a court supervised distribution. He continued reading. Several supporting documents were missing. Instead of page numbers, empty placeholders appeared. Exhibit C, Exhibit F, financial distribution schedule, removed, unavailable. Bradley looked toward Denise. "Excuse me?" She approached. "Yes." "It looks like documents are missing." Denise checked the folder. "They're supposed to be here." "Were they removed?" "Possibly transferred." "Where?" She typed into her computer. A puzzled expression crossed her face. "That's strange." "What is it?" "The system says those exhibits were requested 6 weeks ago." "By whom?" "I'm not authorized to release names." "Were they returned?" "Apparently not. How is that possible?" "They may still be under judicial review." Bradley thanked her again. Another fact. Nothing more. Someone had access to nearly 30-year-old court records only weeks before Evelyn's emergency surgery. That could not be coincidence. Outside rain had begun falling across downtown Columbus. Bradley remained inside his truck for several minutes, reviewing photographs he had legally taken of publicly available pages. He enlarged one image. Near the bottom corner sat a handwritten case notation. Transfer authorized under amended trust instruction. Trust. Harold Benton had mentioned trusts. Hospital billing had suggested protected financial interests. Now court records referenced one as well. Separate observations, beginning to connect. Later that night, Bradley sat alone in his home office. Julia had already gone to bed. He spread copies across his desk in chronological order. Hospital admission, insurance notation, probate records, wrongful death settlement, trust reference, safe deposit key. His engineering instincts recognized a pattern beginning to emerge. Not proof, only alignment, like tiny stress fractures spreading beneath layers of concrete, individually harmless. Together, potentially catastrophic. He opened a fresh notebook. Across the top of the first page he wrote only one sentence: never assume motive before understanding the structure. Then he listed every confirmed fact beneath it. The final entry remained the most troubling. Someone had removed critical court exhibits from a nearly forgotten wrongful death case only 6 weeks earlier. Someone who clearly expected those records to remain hidden. And somewhere inside that old safe deposit box, Bradley suspected the missing pieces had been waiting for decades. Bradley waited until Monday before doing anything with the brass key. Waiting was not hesitation. It was discipline. Over the weekend, he reviewed every document he had collected, comparing dates, signatures, addresses, and court references. Several names appeared repeatedly: Michael Harper, Evelyn Harper, Franklin County Probate Court, and one attorney whose name surfaced on nearly every filing: Charles Whitmore. Bradley searched the Ohio Supreme Court's attorney registry. Charles Whitmore had retired 11 years earlier. His former law practice had dissolved. No public phone number remained. But another name appeared beneath several archived filings: Rebecca Lawson, associate attorney, now partner at Lawson, Pierce & Cole. Bradley scheduled a consultation, not to hire her, only to ask questions. Tuesday afternoon, Rebecca welcomed him into a conference room overlooking Capitol Square. She was in her early 50s, direct, without being unfriendly. "What can I help you with, Mr. Foster?" Bradley placed copies of several public documents on the table. "I've been researching my father-in-law's estate." Rebecca adjusted her glasses. "I remember Charles handling several wrongful death cases in the 90s. "You worked with him?" "I was fresh out of law school." She examined the paperwork carefully. "I can't discuss confidential client information." "I'm not asking you to." She nodded. "Good." Bradley pointed to the settlement notice. "I only want to understand how cases like this generally worked." Rebecca folded her hands. In the mid-90s, wrongful death settlements involving workplace negligence often included structured distributions, meaning a portion went to the surviving spouse. Sometimes another portion was placed into trust if minor children were involved. Could those trusts continue for decades? Absolutely. Especially if there were restrictions written into the agreement. Bradley considered that answer. "What kind of restrictions?" Rebecca answered carefully. "Medical needs, education, age requirements, specific life events." She paused. "Every trust is different." Bradley nodded. "I understand." He thanked her and stood. Rebecca hesitated. "One thing." Bradley stopped. "If you're researching this because something doesn't seem right." She looked down at the paperwork. "Well, don't rely on summaries. Always obtain the original court exhibits. They tell the real story." "I've tried." "They're missing." Rebecca frowned. "They shouldn't be." Outside, Bradley sat inside his truck for several minutes. Another experienced professional had confirmed the missing exhibits mattered. That made 2. The safe deposit key suddenly carried even greater weight. The next morning, Bradley returned to Great Lakes Community Bank. Robert Gaines recognized him immediately. Back again. I'd like to know what I need to legally access the box. Robert nodded. If you're the registered owner, identification. If you're not, probate authority, court order, or authorization from the owner. Bradley reached into his briefcase. I found an estate file connected to the possible owner. Robert glanced toward the paperwork. His expression changed slightly. Wait here. 5 minutes later, Robert returned with a woman wearing an executive badge. Karen Ellis, Regional Operations Manager. She introduced herself politely. Mr. Foster, Robert explained your situation. Bradley nodded. I don't expect special treatment. Good. She smiled faintly. Because we can't provide any. She looked at the brass key. I can confirm one thing. Bradley waited. The box still exists. His heartbeat remained steady. Can you tell me whose name is on it? I'm sorry. No. But it hasn't been abandoned. No. It's active. When was it last accessed? Karen hesitated. I'm not permitted to answer. That pause answered enough. Someone had opened it recently. Otherwise, there would have been no hesitation. Bradley thanked both employees and left. As he reached the parking lot, his phone vibrated. Julia. Hey. Can you stop by Mom's after work? Everything okay? She says someone was asking about Dad. Bradley's grip tightened around the steering wheel. What do you mean? A man came by yesterday. Older. Wearing a gray suit. He asked whether she still had any records from Dad's accident. What did Mom say? She told him to leave. Did she know him? I don't think so. Bradley stared through the windshield. Another coincidence, or another piece. What time should I come over? 6. I'll be there. Evelyn looked unusually anxious that evening, not frightened, alert. She had organized old family photographs across her dining room table. Julia smiled as she picked one up. I haven't seen these in years. Bradley quietly joined them. Michael Harper smiled back from dozens of faded photographs, camping trips, Christmas mornings, a county fair, Julia riding on her father's shoulders. Bradley noticed something unexpected. Michael never appeared wearing expensive clothes, never standing beside luxury cars, never showing signs of unusual wealth, ordinary life, ordinary family. One photograph caught Bradley's attention. Michael stood outside a large industrial building wearing a hard hat. Across the entrance hung a company sign, Midwest Industrial Systems. Bradley memorized the name. He casually asked, "Is that where Michael worked?" Julia nodded. Until the accident. What happened? Julia answered exactly as she always had. Faulty wiring. Everyone said it was tragic. Evelyn remained silent. Bradley studied the photograph again. Engineers noticed environments before faces. The building behind Michael wasn't an electrical contractor's office. It was a manufacturing plant. Something felt off. After dinner, Bradley excused himself and stepped onto the back porch. His phone connected to a public business archive. Within seconds, he located Midwest Industrial Systems. The company no longer existed. It had merged with another corporation 24 years earlier. But archived OSHA records remained publicly available. Bradley searched. One fatal accident. March, 29 years earlier. Employee Michael Harper. Cause listed structural platform collapse. Bradley read the line twice. Structural platform collapse. Not faulty wiring, not electrical failure, a collapsing elevated work platform. That difference mattered, especially to an engineer. He downloaded the report. The OSHA summary contained another surprise. The investigation concluded that multiple safety inspections had been falsified before the collapse. Recommended penalties exceeded $2 million. Bradley's breathing slowed. If inspection had been falsified, the wrongful death settlement might have been substantial, far larger than Julia had ever believed. He returned inside. No one noticed anything unusual. Julia laughed while looking through old photographs. Evelyn quietly folded laundry. Bradley slipped the printed OSHA summary back into his folder. He wasn't ready to ask questions. Not yet. Wednesday morning, he drove to the Columbus Metropolitan Library's local history archive. Corporate mergers often left newspaper records unavailable online. An archivist helped him locate microfilm from 29 years earlier. Headlines flashed across the screen. Worker killed in industrial collapse. Federal investigation begins. Families demand accountability. Weeks later, another headline appeared. Confidential settlement reached before trial. No dollar amount listed. Only one sentence stood out. Legal analysts expect one of Ohio's largest workplace settlements this decade. Bradley leaned closer. One of the largest. That contradicted everything Julia believed about growing up with financial hardship. If the settlement had truly been enormous, where had the money gone? By Thursday afternoon, another answer emerged unexpectedly. A retired OSHA investigator named Leonard Briggs agreed to meet after Bradley contacted him through a professional association. Leonard had investigated Michael Harper's death personally. His memory remained surprisingly sharp. "I never forgot that case." Bradley listened carefully. The company knew those platforms were unsafe. They delayed repairs. A man died. Leonard looked out the diner window. His family deserved every penny they received, Bradley asked quietly. "Do you remember the settlement?" Leonard shook his head. "Not exactly. But it was significant. Enough that people around the office talked about it." He paused. There was one strange thing. Bradley looked up. "What?" "The widow." "Evelyn Harper." "What about her?" Leonard frowned. "A few months after everything ended, someone contacted our office asking for copies of inspection records." "Who?" "I don't remember. But I remember thinking." He searched for the right words. "Noj. Why would anyone need them after the case was over?" Bradley drove home before sunset. His folder had grown thicker. His questions had multiplied. The settlement had been real. The accident story Julia knew was false. Someone had recently searched for decades-old records. Someone had removed court exhibits. Someone had kept an active safe deposit box hidden all these years. As he parked in his driveway, his phone vibrated once. An email notification. Sender Franklin County Probate Records. Subject requested documents available. Bradley opened the attachment. Most files were exactly what he expected. Routine certifications, court stamps, administrative notices. Then he reached the final page. A handwritten routing slip, stamped only 5 weeks earlier. Requested by name withheld under judicial privacy order. Reason certified copy for active civil matter. Bradley stared at the words for several long seconds. The past wasn't buried. Someone was using it. Right now. Bradley read the probate notice 3 more times before closing his laptop. The wording refused to leave his mind. Certified copy for active civil matter. Not closed, not historical, active. Whatever had happened nearly 30 years ago was still affecting someone today. He placed the printed page beside every other document on his dining room table. Hospital records, OSHA reports, probate filings, newspaper archives. The safe deposit key. Individually, each document answered one question while creating 2 more. Together, they suggested something much larger than a forgotten family tragedy. Bradley refused to guess. He needed numbers. Numbers had a way of exposing stories that words tried to hide. Thursday morning, he called someone he had trusted for almost 10 years, Nathan Brooks, a certified fraud examiner and forensic accountant based in Cincinnati. They had first met during a construction fraud investigation involving falsified bridge invoices. Nathan answered on the second ring. "Bradley Foster. That usually means you found something interesting." "I found something confusing." Those are the expensive ones. Bradley smiled slightly. Can we meet? The following afternoon, they sat inside Nathan's office overlooking Fountain Square. Unlike most accounting firms, Nathan's walls displayed maps, timelines, and flowcharts instead of framed degrees. Money, Bradley noticed, often behaved like water. Nathan seemed to visualize it that way. Bradley spread every document across the conference table. Nathan remained silent for nearly 15 minutes. He never interrupted, never speculated. Finally, he leaned back. Your instincts are good. You think so? I think you're asking the right questions. Bradley waited. Nathan tapped the wrongful death settlement. This isn't just about how much money existed. It's about where it traveled. What do you mean? If the settlement funded a trust, Nathan picked up another page. Then every major distribution should leave a paper trail. Even after 30 years. Especially after 30 years. Bradley frowned. What if someone wanted to hide it? Nathan shrugged. They can hide ownership. They can hide beneficiaries. They can even hide accounts. But moving money always creates footprints. Bradley nodded. What would you need? Nathan made a short list. The probate number. The trust reference. Property records. Tax parcels. Corporate registrations. And patience. I have that. I know, Nathan smiled. You've never been impulsive. 3 days later, Nathan called. I've got something. Bradley drove to Cincinnati immediately after work. Nathan projected several diagrams onto a large monitor. Blue lines connected names. Red lines connected addresses. Gray lines connected financial entities. It starts here. Nathan pointed to the wrongful death settlement. After the settlement closed, a trust was created. Bradley studied the screen. The beneficiary. Unknown. The documents remained sealed. Nathan clicked again. But look at this. 3 different property purchases appeared over 12 years. Each property belonged to different limited liability companies. None carried Evelyn Harper's name. Why are you showing me these? Nathan zoomed in. The mailing address. All 3 LLCs listed the same mailing address. A small office building outside Newark, Ohio. Nathan continued. Now watch. He clicked again. Property taxes for every building were paid through the same escrow administrator. Another click. The administrator managed exactly 1 family trust. Bradley's eyes narrowed. The Harper Trust. Nathan nodded slowly. I can't prove ownership. But every public record points in that direction. Bradley looked at the screen for a long moment. So Evelyn may control assets that don't appear under her own name. Exactly. And if she does, Nathan folded his arms. She's significantly wealthier than anyone believes. Bradley thought about Evelyn's modest ranch house, her older sedan, her constant complaints about money. None of it fit. How significant? Nathan hesitated. I'm estimating. I know. If the real estate portfolio is complete. He entered several figures. You're looking at assets worth somewhere between $6 and $8 million. Bradley said nothing. The silence lasted almost 30 seconds. Nathan broke it. Surprised? Not by the number. Then what? By the consistency. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Explain. Every person I've spoken to described Evelyn as financially struggling. Nathan nodded. That's usually intentional. Why? Because poor people aren't expected to have hidden assets. Bradley leaned forward. What else? Nathan opened another spreadsheet. This part is stranger. Several outgoing transfers appeared over the previous year. Not the exact amounts. only publicly reportable transaction references linked through property filings, regular distributions, quarterly, always the same week, always ending in late July. This year's payment, Nathan enlarged one column. Never happened. Bradley looked closer. What stopped it? Nathan clicked another screen. I don't know. But something interrupted the schedule. Bradley mentally reviewed the timeline. Late July, emergency surgery, hospital payment, his own wire transfer. He looked up. The surgery. Nathan nodded. I was thinking the same thing. Bradley's pulse remained steady. Explain. If someone expected medical expenses to come from trust assets, Nathan pointed toward another document. But you personally paid $187,000 instead. He paused. The trust never needed release money. Bradley understood immediately. And if someone was waiting for that withdrawal, Nathan finished the thought. Your payment accidentally disrupted whatever financial plan existed. Neither man spoke for several moments. Bradley stared at this flowchart. For the first time since hearing Evelyn whisper outside the hospital room, the pieces formed something resembling a structure. His generosity had not simply saved Evelyn's life. It had interfered with someone else's expectations. Nathan printed several pages. I've got one more thing. He handed Bradley another report. Last month, one of those LLCs attempted a wire transfer. Bradley scanned the page. Destination account withheld. Status canceled. Reason authorization unavailable. Date? The morning after Evelyn's surgery. Bradley's eyes stopped on the timestamp. 8:42 a.m., almost the exact time he had signed the hospital payment authorization. What would cause a cancellation? Nathan shrugged. The authorized person became unavailable. Medical emergency. Legal hold. Missing signature. Several possibilities. Bradley slowly placed the report onto the table. Someone had intended to move a large amount of money. Then Evelyn's surgery happened. Then Bradley paid personally. Then the transfer failed. Coincidences were becoming increasingly difficult to believe. Nathan looked directly at him. What are you going to do? Bradley answered without hesitation. Nothing. Nathan laughed. I should have expected that. I don't have enough. You have plenty. I have evidence. Not understanding. Nathan nodded approvingly. Good distinction. As Bradley prepared to leave, Nathan stopped him. One warning, Bradley turned. If hidden assets really exist, they're usually protected by people who know exactly what they're doing. I'm aware. And if someone realizes you're asking questions. Nathan didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The drive back to Columbus felt unusually quiet. Rain drifted across Interstate 71 in slow waves. Bradley drove at the speed limit, replaying every conversation from the past 2 weeks. Harold Benton, Rebecca Lawson, Leonard Briggs, Nathan Brooks. None of them knew each other, yet each had independently pointed towards the same conclusion. Money, trusts, missing records, protected interests. When he reached home shortly after 9, Julia was sitting alone on the back porch. She looked exhausted. You've been working late. In Cincinnati. For work. Bradley looked at her for a brief moment. Something like that. She nodded without asking more questions. After several minutes, she spoke again. Mom keeps asking whether you've said anything. Bradley's attention sharpened. Said anything about what? Julia hesitated. I don't know. She just keeps asking if you've mentioned the hospital. Bradley kept his expression unchanged. I haven't. Julia stared into the darkness beyond the backyard fence. Sometimes I think she's afraid of something. Bradley quietly answered, I think so too. Neither of them said another word. Inside the house, Bradley placed Nathan's reports into his locked office cabinet. Before turning off the light, he noticed one final detail on the canceled wire transfer. A reference code. Only 6 digits. It matched the exact numerical prefix printed on the faded tag attached to the brass safe deposit key. The box, the trust, the canceled transfer. They had never been separate mysteries. They had been parts of the same system all along. Bradley slept for less than 4 hours, not because he was afraid, because his mind refused to stop organizing information. He stood in his home office before sunrise, pinning copies of documents across a large corkboard. Hospital records, probate filings, OSHA reports, property records, Nathan's financial diagrams, the canceled wire transfer, the brass key. Red strings would have looked dramatic in a movie. Bradley preferred numbered labels. Evidence spoke more clearly than theatrics. He wrote only one question at the center of the board. What truth is Evelyn trying to protect? He no longer believed the answer involved an affair, or hidden children, or another marriage. Those theories belonged in television dramas. Real secrets usually revolved around money, responsibility, and fear. Before leaving for work, he received a text from Julia. "Mom wants us over for dinner tonight." Bradley replied with a single word. "Okay." The workday passed quietly. He completed a structural review for an elementary school renovation outside Columbus. His coworkers noticed nothing unusual. Only Daniel Mercer stopped by his office. "You finally getting some sleep?" "A little." "You still worried about your mother-in-law?" Bradley looked at the engineering drawings spread across his desk. "I think I'm worried about something much older." Daniel laughed. "That sounds mysterious." Bradley simply smiled. By 6 o'clock, they arrived at Evelyn's house. Dinner felt strangely normal. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh green beans. The television remained off. Soft jazz played through the kitchen speakers. Julia described a fundraising event at the nonprofit where she worked. Evelyn asked Bradley about bridge construction. Small talk, almost rehearsed. Halfway through dinner, Evelyn suddenly excused herself. "I forgot to take my medication." She disappeared down the hallway. Julia sighed. "She's been distracted ever since the surgery." Bradley nodded. "Has she?" Julia looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." He chose his words carefully. "She seems worried." Julia lowered her voice. "She's always worried." "Ever since Dad died?" Bradley looked at her. "What do you remember about your father's accident?" Julia shrugged. "Not much. I was 7. Mom always said there was an electrical explosion. The company accepted responsibility. Then everything was over. She never talked about it again." Bradley remained silent. Julia noticed. "What? You've asked about Dad several times lately." "I'm interested in family history." She smiled faintly. "You sound like an engineer." "I am?" She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I know you're trying to help Mom. Just don't push too hard." Before Bradley could answer, Evelyn returned, carrying a small envelope. She placed it beside Julia's plate. "I found these." Julia opened it. Inside were several faded photographs, school pictures, birthday parties, family vacations. One photograph made Julia stop. She stared at it longer than the others. "That's strange?" Bradley leaned slightly closer. The picture showed Michael Harper standing beside a younger Evelyn outside what appeared to be a law office. Michael held a folder. Across the top, barely visible, appeared the words Whitmore and Associates, the same attorney Bradley had researched days earlier. Julia frowned. "I've never seen this." Evelyn quickly reached for the photograph. "Oh, that was after paperwork." "What paperwork?" "The accident." She slipped the photograph back into the envelope almost immediately. Too quickly. Bradley noticed. Julia noticed too. Neither said anything. After dinner, Bradley volunteered to wash the dishes. Julia stepped outside to answer a phone call. Evelyn dried plates beside him. For nearly 2 minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "You've been asking questions." Bradley continued washing a glass. "A few." "Why?" "I like understanding things." She set another plate into the cabinet. "Some things are better left buried." Bradley calmly answered, "Only if they're truly buried." Evelyn stopped moving. For several seconds, she stared at the countertop. Then she quietly said, "You remind me of Michael." Bradley looked at her. He never stopped asking questions either. Her voice softened, and it destroyed him. Before Bradley could respond, Julia returned inside. The conversation ended. The drive home passed mostly in silence. About 15 minutes after they arrived, Julia knocked gently on Bradley's office door. "Can we talk?" He closed his laptop. "Of course." She sat across from him. "I need to tell you something." Bradley waited. "When I was 16, she looked toward the window. Mom took me to a lawyer." Bradley said nothing. "I signed papers." "What kind?" "I honestly don't know. I didn't read them. Mom said they were connected to Dad. She told me it was routine." Bradley's attention sharpened. "Do you remember the lawyer?" Julia thought for a moment. "No. But I remember everyone treating Mom like she already understood everything. You didn't ask questions." "I trusted her." She looked embarrassed. "I was a kid." Bradley nodded. "Do you remember anything else?" Julia hesitated. "There was one sentence." "What sentence?" Mom kept repeating it before we went inside." Bradley remained perfectly still. "What did she say?" Julia closed her eyes, searching her memory. "Never tell anyone about the trust." The room fell silent. Bradley spoke carefully. "There was definitely a trust." Julia nodded slowly. "I forgot about it until tonight. Honestly, I haven't thought about that day in almost 20 years. Bradley asked another question. "Did your mother ever explain what the trust was?" "No. I assumed it disappeared." "Or ended?" Bradley looked toward the corkboard covered with documents. Nathan had been right. The trust wasn't speculation anymore. Julia herself had confirmed it existed. "What else do you remember?" She rubbed her forehead. "There was another man." "What man?" "I don't know his name. He wasn't the lawyer." "He kept telling Mom." Julia stopped speaking. "What?" "That if anyone ever audited the trust, everything had to match exactly." Bradley's heartbeat slowed. Audit, trust, matching records, professional language, not family conversation. He reached for a legal pad. "I'm going to ask you something." "Okay." "Answer only if you're certain." Julia nodded. "Did you ever receive money from the trust?" "No." "Did your mother—" "I don't know. Did anyone ever explain where the settlement money went?" Julia looked genuinely confused. "What settlement?" Bradley stared at her. "The wrongful death settlement after your father's death." Julia blinked. "I thought there wasn't much." Bradley understood immediately. She wasn't pretending. She truly believed her father had left almost nothing behind. Every answer came without hesitation, without calculation, without contradiction. For the first time since the investigation began, Bradley felt almost certain about one thing. Julia wasn't hiding the truth. She had been raised without it. Late that night, after Julia had gone to bed, Bradley stood alone in his office. He crossed one possibility off the board. Julia is involved. No, not intentionally. She knew fragments, memories, half-truths, nothing more. His phone vibrated. An email from Nathan Brooks. Subject: corporate registration update. Bradley opened the attachment. One newly discovered LLC manager had signed financial reports for 3 different Harper-related companies. The signature belonged to someone Bradley had never heard of. Richard Sloan, attorney at law, Columbus, Ohio. The accompanying note from Nathan contained only one sentence. He's still practicing. Before Bradley could close the email, another notification appeared. This one from the Ohio court docket. A new filing had been entered that afternoon. Case reference: Harper Family Trust. Status counsel of record updated. Bradley stared at the screen. Someone had hired a new attorney. Not years ago. Today. He looked toward the bedroom where Julia slept peacefully, then back at the court filing. Evelyn wasn't waiting for the past to stay hidden anymore. She was preparing for a fight, and Bradley had the unmistakable feeling that she somehow already knew he was getting closer to the truth. Bradley did not contact Richard Sloan immediately. He spent the next 48 hours learning everything he could about the attorney instead. Richard Sloan specialized in estate administration, trust litigation, and fiduciary law. His name appeared in dozens of probate cases across central Ohio. He had a reputation for precision discretion and rarely speaking to the press. Nothing suggested misconduct. Nothing suggested innocence either. Bradley had learned long ago that reputation was not evidence. On Saturday morning, he drove alone to the Franklin County Recorder's office. The building had become familiar over the previous weeks. The clerk behind the counter recognized him. "Back again, Mr. Foster." Bradley smiled politely. "I think I'm becoming a regular." She laughed. "What are we looking for today?" "Property transfers connected to 3 LLCs. He handed her the names Nathan had uncovered. Within 20 minutes, she returned, carrying a thick stack of certified property records. Bradley rented a small research table near the windows. For nearly 3 hours, he reviewed every page: purchase contracts, warranty deeds, mortgage releases, tax assessments, corporate registrations. Nothing illegal, everything properly filed. Yet one pattern appeared repeatedly. Every property had been purchased significantly below market value, not by thousands, by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Bradley opened another folder. Each transaction had occurred within 60 days of a trust distribution. He circled every date. Again, he refused to jump to conclusions. Timing alone proved nothing. Still, timing deserved attention. As he packed his papers, the same clerk approached. "You've been looking at those files for weeks." Bradley nodded. "I'm trying to understand old transactions." She hesitated. "I probably shouldn't mention this." Bradley waited. But another man requested copies of those same LLC records about a month ago. His attention sharpened. "Do you remember him?" "Older. Gray hair. Very polite. Suit and tie." Bradley thought of Julia's description. The stranger who had visited Evelyn. "Did he give his name?" She shook her head. "No. He paid cash." Another unknown investigator, another person following the same trail. Outside, Bradley sat in his truck reviewing his notes. Someone else had been asking identical questions weeks before him. Whoever that man was, he had reached the public records before Bradley ever suspected anything was wrong. That meant Bradley wasn't the only person interested in Michael Harper's estate. Monday afternoon, Bradley received a phone call from Nathan. "I found someone." "Who?" "A former trust administrator." Bradley's grip tightened on the phone. "Still alive?" "Retired. Living outside Lancaster." "Willing to talk?" Nathan paused. "I didn't tell her much." "But she agreed to meet." Her name was Margaret Ellis. She had spent 32 years managing private trusts for Central Ohio Financial Services before retiring. managing private trusts for Central Ohio Financial Services before retiring. Her home overlooked rolling farmland east of Columbus. Margaret welcomed Bradley and Nathan into a quiet sunroom filled with books and family photographs. She poured coffee before anyone discussed business. Only after everyone settled into their chairs did Nathan explain why they had come. Margaret listened without interrupting. When Bradley finished, she remained silent for nearly a minute. Finally, she spoke. "I can't discuss confidential clients." "I understand," Bradley answered. "But perhaps you can explain how trusts generally work." She smiled. A careful question. Bradley waited. "If a wrongful death settlement establishes a family trust," Margaret began slowly. "No, the trustee has one legal responsibility above everything else: loyalty. Every decision must benefit the beneficiaries. What if it doesn't? Then the trustee may have breached fiduciary duty." Bradley nodded. "What records would exist?" "Every distribution, every investment, every expense, every transfer. Nothing disappears. Even after decades. Especially after decades." Nathan asked another question. "What happens if records don't match?" Margaret's expression became serious. "A court orders an accounting." Bradley looked at her carefully. "An accounting? The trustee must explain every dollar." "What if they can't?" Margaret answered quietly. "The consequences can be severe." She never used the word fraud. She didn't need to. Before leaving, Bradley thanked her sincerely. As they reached the driveway, Margaret called after him. "Mr. Foster." He turned. "If your instincts are leading you toward old trust records," she paused, "don't rely only on financial documents." "What else should I look for?" "The annual beneficiary notices." "They're required." "If someone never received them..." She didn't finish. Again, she didn't have to. On the drive home, Nathan finally spoke. "You're thinking the same thing I am." Bradley kept his eyes on the road. "Julia." Nathan nodded. "If she was a beneficiary..." "Did she ever receive notices?" Bradley answered immediately. "No." "I'm certain she would remember." Tuesday evening, Bradley decided to test something. He waited until after dinner. "Julia," she looked up from the couch. "Can I ask you another question?" She smiled. "I figured there'd be another one." He sat beside her. "Every year after your father's death?" "Did you ever receive letters about a trust?" She looked genuinely puzzled. "No." "Statements?" "No." "Tax forms?" "No." "Meetings?" "No." She thought for another moment. "The only legal meeting I remember was when I was 16. Nothing after that." Bradley nodded. Exactly as he expected. Later that night, he searched through boxes stored in the basement. Tax returns, old insurance policies, mortgage paperwork, family correspondence. Everything they had kept since marrying 12 years earlier. Near the bottom of one box sat a worn accordion folder labeled Julia Personal. Inside were school transcripts, college applications, medical records, and a small sealed envelope. The postmark caught Bradley's attention: Columbus, 15 years earlier. The envelope had never been opened. It was addressed to Julia Harper, forwarding address requested. The sender read Whitmore and Associates. Bradley stared at it. The law firm handling Michael Harper's estate. Julia had never opened it. He carried the envelope upstairs. "Julia." She looked over. "Do you know what this is?" She frowned. "I've never seen it." "It was in your records." She carefully examined the envelope. "It was sent after I moved into my college dorm. It must have been forwarded to Mom's house." She looked confused. "Why wasn't it opened?" Bradley remained silent. Only Julia could answer that. Slowly she broke the aging seal. Inside rested a single folded letter. Most of it was routine legal language. Then Julia stopped reading. Her face drained of color. "What?" She handed the paper to Bradley. One sentence had been highlighted by the original office staff. Beneficiary acknowledgement remains outstanding despite multiple notification attempts. Bradley looked back at Julia. "Multiple attempts." She whispered the words as though hearing them for the first time. "They tried to contact me." She searched her memory desperately. "I never knew." Bradley looked at the letter again. 3 certified mailing dates appeared at the bottom. Every one of them matched periods when Julia had still been living with Evelyn. The letters had not disappeared in the mail. Someone had received them. Someone had simply made sure Julia never did. Julia slowly sat down. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "My mother?" She couldn't finish. Bradley knelt beside her. "We don't know why." She shook her head. "No. But we know she hid this." For the first time since the investigation began, Julia's confidence in her mother's story visibly cracked. Not because Bradley had accused Evelyn, because the evidence had spoken for itself. Wednesday morning another development arrived. Nathan called before 8. "I've secured something." "What?" A retired records custodian from Whitmore's old law office kept archived client indexes after the firm dissolved. Bradley stopped walking. "Indexes. They don't contain confidential documents. But they do list every certified mailing." Bradley's pulse quickened. "If those indexes match the unopened letter..." Nathan finished the thought. "We'll be able to prove that Julia was intentionally notified. And that someone prevented those notices from reaching her." Bradley looked across the parking lot as employees entered his office building. Weeks earlier, this investigation had begun with a whispered warning outside a hospital room. Now it had become something far more precise. Not rumors, not suspicions, a chain of documentary evidence, hospital records, court filings, financial patterns, trust references, unopened legal correspondence. Each new document removed another layer of uncertainty. And for the first time, Bradley believed they were close to identifying not only what had been hidden, but exactly how it had been hidden for nearly 3 decades. Thursday morning began with an unexpected knock on Bradley's office door. Daniel Mercer leaned against the frame holding 2 coffee cups. "You've been living here lately." Bradley accepted one. "Feels that way." Daniel looked at the stacks of engineering drawings covering the desk. "You know whatever you're dealing with?" He hesitated. "Don't let it consume you." Bradley appreciated the concern. "I won't." It was the truth. He had no intention of allowing emotion to replace discipline. As soon as Daniel left, Bradley's phone rang. "Nathan." "I have the index." Bradley stood immediately. "I'll be there in 2 hours." Nathan had arranged access to the archived client register through a retired office administrator named Susan Keller. Whitmore and Associates had closed more than a decade earlier, but Susan had preserved non-confidential administrative logs before the files were transferred into storage. She welcomed Bradley into a modest office behind her home. Boxes lined every wall. Each carried handwritten labels, estate files, corporate clients, certified mail logs. "I can't release client documents," Susan said, "but mailing records aren't privileged." She placed a large leather-bound ledger on the table. The pages had yellowed with age. Bradley carefully turned them one at a time. Every certified letter sent by the firm had been recorded by hand. Date, recipient, tracking number, purpose. Then he found it. Harper Trust, beneficiary notice. Julia Harper. 3 separate certified mailings. The dates matched the unopened letter exactly. Susan adjusted her glasses. "Looks like they kept trying." Bradley pointed to a handwritten notation beside the 3rd mailing. "What does this abbreviation mean?" Susan leaned closer. Oh. I remember using that. What is it? Returned by recipient representative. Bradley frowned. Recipient representative? If someone authorized to receive mail signs for it instead. Parents often did that for college students. Bradley stared at the page. So someone signed instead of Julia. Susan nodded. That's what it appears to mean. Would the law office know Julia never actually received it? No. We only confirmed that an authorized person accepted delivery. Bradley thanked Susan before photographing the page with her permission. Outside, Nathan looked at him. This changes things. Bradley nodded slowly. It confirms the notices didn't disappear. They were intercepted. Nathan folded his arms. The question is whether it was legal. Or intentional. Neither man answered. That question would require much stronger evidence. Later that afternoon, Bradley drove to Evelyn's neighborhood. He had no appointment, no accusation. He simply wanted to observe. Evelyn's house appeared quiet. Murphy slept beneath the front window. The curtains remained open. As Bradley parked across the street, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. A dark blue sedan. Richard Sloane stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. Bradley recognized him instantly from the photograph on the law firm's website. The attorney knocked once. Evelyn opened the door immediately. She had been expecting him. Bradley checked the time. 2:17 p.m. Richard remained inside for nearly 90 minutes. When he finally left, he carried no briefcase. He had entered with documents. He exited without them. Bradley made no attempt to follow him. Instead, he quietly noted the time and drove away. That evening, Julia arrived home unusually late. She looked exhausted. Everything okay? She dropped her purse onto the kitchen counter. I had lunch with Mom. Bradley's attention sharpened. How was she? Nervous. About what? Julia hesitated. She asked me something strange. What? She wanted to know whether you've ever asked me about Dad's settlement. Bradley kept his expression neutral. What did you say? I told her yes. Julia watched him carefully. I also told her I didn't understand why everyone keeps avoiding the subject. What did she say? Nothing. She just changed the conversation. Bradley poured 2 glasses of water. Did she mention Richard Sloane? Julia looked surprised. How do you know that name? So she did. Julia nodded slowly. He stopped by while I was there. What for? Mom introduced him as her estate attorney. Bradley considered that answer. Estate attorney, not trust attorney, not litigation counsel. Perhaps true. Perhaps intentionally incomplete. Julia continued. He asked whether I would be willing to sign updated family paperwork. Did you? No. Bradley looked at her. Why not? She took a slow breath. For the first time. She paused. I wanted to read everything first. Bradley smiled faintly. I think that's wise. She smiled back, though uncertainty remained in her eyes. I never questioned Mom before. I know. I feel guilty. Bradley gently shook his head. Trust isn't something to feel guilty about. It's something to protect. Julia sat quietly for a moment. Bradley. Yes. If my father really left something behind. She struggled to finish the sentence. Why wouldn't Mom tell me? Bradley answered honestly. I don't know. And until we know, we shouldn't assume. She nodded. That was one reason she trusted him. He never filled gaps with speculation. Friday morning, another envelope arrived in Bradley's mailbox. No return address. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, typed, no signature. It contained only one sentence. Stop looking into Michael Harper's estate. There was no threat, No demand for money, no explanation. Just 7 words. Bradley examined the paper carefully. Standard printer, common office stock, no fingerprints visible, no identifying marks. He placed it into a plastic document sleeve without touching the center of the page. Then he called Nathan. "I received something." "What kind of something?" "Someone knows I'm asking questions." Nathan fell silent. "Do you think it's connected?" "I don't know." "But I'm documenting it." "Good. Don't respond." "I wasn't planning to." That afternoon, Bradley contacted Rebecca Lawson once more. She agreed to meet briefly. When he showed her copies of the beneficiary mailing index, she studied them for several minutes. Finally, she looked up. "If these records are authentic..." "They are." "Then someone accepted legal notices intended for Julia." "What does that mean legally?" Rebecca chose her words carefully. "It doesn't prove misconduct. But it raises serious questions." "What questions?" "Whether a beneficiary received legally required information. And if she didn't," Rebecca closed the folder. "A judge could order production of every trust record." Bradley felt the pieces settling into place. Not because he had won, because there was finally a lawful path toward the truth. As he left Rebecca's office, his phone vibrated. A text from Julia. "Can you come to Mom's tonight?" "She says she found something Dad left for me." Bradley stared at the message. For several seconds, he didn't move. Evelyn had spent nearly 3 decades saying almost nothing about Michael Harper. Now, within days of Bradley's investigation, she had suddenly found something. Whatever waited at Evelyn's house that evening, Bradley doubted it was a coincidence. Bradley arrived at Evelyn's house exactly at 7 o'clock. He parked in the driveway beside Julia's car. The front porch light was already on. Evelyn opened the door before either of them had a chance to knock. "I'm glad you're both here." Her smile looked practiced. Not forced, simply rehearsed. Inside, the dining room table had been cleared, except for a single cardboard document box. Its edges had faded with age. A strip of brittle masking tape crossed the lid. Written in black marker were 2 words: Michael Harper. Julia stopped walking. "I've never seen that before." Evelyn rested both hands on the box. "I found it while cleaning the attic." Bradley noticed something immediately. The cardboard showed almost no dust. If it had truly been sitting in an attic for decades, it should have looked older than it did. He said nothing. Evelyn lifted the lid. Inside rested photo albums, greeting cards, several old pay stubs, and a leather-bound planner. Julia smiled sadly as she picked up a Christmas photograph. "I barely remember this." Evelyn watched her carefully. "I thought it was time you had these." Bradley quietly examined the remaining contents. Nothing appeared especially unusual. Until he reached the bottom, a manila envelope, unsealed. Across the front, someone had written "Insurance Correspondence." Bradley looked toward Evelyn. "May I?" She hesitated for less than a second. "Of course." Inside lay several photocopies. Not originals. Settlement summaries, insurance letters, medical invoices. Everything seemed ordinary until Bradley noticed the page numbers. One document jumped from page 2 directly to page 5. Pages 3 and 4 were missing. He calmly set the papers back inside the envelope. Julia looked up. "Anything interesting?" Bradley answered honestly. "Incomplete." Evelyn immediately spoke. "Some pages must have been lost." Bradley nodded politely. "Perhaps." The conversation shifted to family memories, childhood vacations, Michael's favorite fishing spots, old neighbors. For nearly an hour, no one mentioned lawsuits or trusts. When Julia stepped into the kitchen to make coffee, Bradley remained in the dining room with Evelyn. She lowered her voice. "You'd received my message." "I didn't know it was from you." I assumed you'd understand. Bradley met her eyes. The anonymous letter. She didn't answer directly. Some investigations hurt innocent people. Bradley replied quietly. So does hiding the truth. For the first time since he had known her, Evelyn looked genuinely tired. Not physically, emotionally. You think you know what's happening? I don't. I know what the documents say. They never tell the whole story. No. They usually tell enough. Julia returned carrying 3 coffee mugs. The private conversation ended instantly. Later that night, after they arrived home, Julia carried the cardboard box into the living room. I want to organize everything. Bradley sat beside her. They sorted photographs into neat piles. Letters, receipts, greeting cards, school records. Near the bottom of the planner, Bradley noticed something tucked inside the back cover. A folded yellow receipt. He unfolded it carefully. First Federal Bank, safe deposit box rental, annual renewal. The date caught his attention. The rental had been renewed 5 years after Michael Harper's death. The signature line contained only initials, E.H. Evelyn Harper. Julia leaned closer. What is it? Is it nothing unusual? He handed her the receipt. It's just a bank renewal. She glanced at it briefly before setting it aside. Bradley quietly memorized the box number, 114B, the same numerical prefix engraved on the brass key. Now he knew with certainty. The key belonged to Michael Harper's safe deposit box. Saturday morning, Bradley contacted Rebecca Lawson again. This time he brought copies of every newly discovered document. She reviewed them one by one. When she'd reached the safe deposit receipt, she stopped. Interesting. What? This renewal occurred after probate closed. Is that unusual? It depends. She leaned back. If the box belonged solely to Michael, ownership should have transferred through the estate. If it belonged to the trust, she paused. That's different. Bradley asked another question. What would allow someone to keep renewing it for decades? Rebecca answered immediately. Authority. Documented authority. What kind? Trustee authority. Executor authority. Court authorization. She pointed toward the receipt. This alone doesn't tell us which. But it tells us someone remained legally connected to that box. Bradley thanked her. As he prepared to leave, Rebecca opened another folder. I requested something for you. She slid a certified court order across the table. What is it? A petition. For what? Production of historical trust accounting. Bradley looked at her. You filed this. I drafted it. You haven't filed it yet. Why not? Rebecca smiled. Because I needed to know whether Julia wanted answers. Bradley understood. Without Julia's participation, the legal process would become much more complicated. That evening, Bradley told Julia everything. Not his suspicions, only the confirmed evidence, the trust, the beneficiary notices, the unopened letters, the safe deposit receipt, the missing document pages. He laid every certified copy across the dining room table, one by one, without commentary. Julia read each page silently. Nearly 40 minutes passed before she finally spoke. I don't recognize any of this. I know. She looked toward Bradley. You've never once asked me to choose between you and Mom. I'm not asking now. She nodded slowly. Thank you. She stood and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. I've spent my entire life believing one story. She turned back. What if that story wasn't true? Bradley answered gently. Then we find the true one. Nothing more, nothing less. Sunday afternoon, Julia asked to visit her mother's house alone. Bradley encouraged her to go. He remained home reviewing engineering reports. Nearly 3 hours later, she returned, carrying another envelope. She looked pale. "What happened?" Julia placed the envelope on the kitchen table. "I asked Mom directly." "What did you ask?" "Whether Dad left a trust." Bradley waited. "She said no." Julia slowly opened the envelope. "I told her I already knew there had been one." "What did she do?" "She became angry." Julia swallowed hard. "Then she told me to leave." Bradley looked at the envelope. "What's inside?" "I found it in the trash can beside her desk." She unfolded several crumpled pages. Bradley immediately recognized them. Photocopies, probate exhibits, the missing page 3, the missing page 4. He carefully flattened each sheet. Page 3 contained a distribution schedule. The wrongful death settlement had established a trust worth several $1,000,000. Julia's name appeared as the primary lifetime beneficiary. Page 4 contained trustee responsibilities. The trustee, Evelyn Harper. Bradley continued reading. Near the bottom sat another paragraph. No trustee shall withhold annual financial reports from the beneficiary after the beneficiary reaches 18 years of age. Julia covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" Bradley remained silent. There was still one final page attached behind the distribution schedule. A signed acknowledgement. Not Julia's. Someone had signed on her behalf. The signature resembled Julia's from a distance, but the formation of the letters differed. Rebecca Lawson examined the copies later that evening. She looked up after only a few moments. "If these are genuine," she pointed to the final page. "Someone forged Julia's acknowledgement of receiving trust disclosures." Bradley asked quietly, "Can you prove it?" Rebecca nodded. "Very likely." "How?" "We obtain known handwriting samples. Then, we ask the court to appoint a forensic document examiner." She carefully stacked the pages. "Bradley." "Yes." "This investigation has officially changed." "How?" Rebecca looked directly at both of them. "We're no longer trying to discover whether something happened." She tapped the forged signature. "We're preparing to prove it." Rebecca Lawson moved quickly. By Monday morning, she had assembled a litigation team consisting of a forensic document examiner, a retired trust auditor, and a paralegal specializing in probate archives. Bradley attended the first strategy meeting, but spoke very little. His role was simple: provide facts, avoid assumptions. Rebecca stood before a whiteboard covered with dates. "Everything we do from this point forward must survive judicial scrutiny." She wrote 3 headings: authenticity, chain of custody, intent. She turned toward Bradley. "The documents Julia recovered from Evelyn's trash are important. But by themselves, they won't be enough." "Why not?" "Because opposing counsel will argue they were altered, or fabricated, or planted." Bradley nodded. "What do we need?" "Original sources." She began assigning tasks. The forensic examiner would compare signatures. The trust auditor would reconstruct decades of distributions. Rebecca herself would petition the court to compel production of the original trust records. Everything would be documented. Nothing would rely on memory. 3 days later, Julia accompanied Rebecca to sign the formal petition. She read every page before placing her signature at the bottom. When she finished, she looked at Rebecca. "I never imagined I'd be filing paperwork against my own mother." Rebecca answered quietly, "You're not filing against your mother. You're asking the court for the truth." Julia lowered her eyes. The distinction mattered. Meanwhile, Bradley continued working full-time. Bridge inspections, engineering reports, construction meetings. His life remained surprisingly ordinary, despite the investigation unfolding around him. That balance kept him grounded. Thursday afternoon, Nathan called again. "The reconstructed financial timeline is finished." Bradley drove to Cincinnati after work. Nathan projected another chart onto the conference room wall. This one stretched nearly 30 years. Colored bars represented annual trust activity, investment returns, property purchases, maintenance expenses, tax payments. Then came the beneficiary distributions, or rather, the lack of them. Nathan pointed to a long, empty section. According to every public filing, Julia should have begun receiving annual financial reports at age 18. Bradley nodded. She didn't. Exactly. Nathan clicked again. More importantly, the trust continued reporting administrative expenses every single year. Bradley examined the figures. Attorney fees, accounting fees, property management, insurance. Everything appeared. Everything except beneficiary acknowledgments. That's impossible. Nathan smiled faintly. It should be. The trust couldn't legally continue operating without documenting communication with its beneficiary. Bradley looked toward him. So either the records exist, or someone created substitutes. Nathan nodded. I believe that's exactly what happened. Friday morning, the court granted Rebecca's request for limited discovery. Not a final ruling, not a victory, simply permission to obtain specific records. Rebecca immediately issued subpoenas: Great Lakes Community Bank, Central Ohio Financial Services, Richard Sloan. Every request narrowly tailored, every request supported by certified evidence. Late that afternoon, Bradley received another anonymous envelope. This one contained no message, only a single photograph. It showed Bradley leaving the Franklin County Records Center 2 weeks earlier. Someone had been watching him. He examined the print carefully. Professional camera, long-distance lens, no identifying marks. Instead of reacting emotionally, Bradley placed the photograph into another evidence sleeve. Then he emailed Rebecca. She called within minutes. You've kept the envelope? Yes. Good. Don't touch anything else. She arranged for the entire package to be examined. The following Monday, the first deposition took place, not in a courtroom, inside a conference room. Richard Sloan appeared with another attorney representing Evelyn. His demeanor remained calm, professional. Rebecca began with routine questions. State your name. Richard Allen Sloan. Occupation. Attorney. Did you become legal counsel for Evelyn Harper this year? Yes. When? Approximately 6 weeks ago. Bradley recognized the timeline immediately. 6 weeks. Exactly when someone had requested the missing probate exhibits. Rebecca continued. Were you aware of the Harper Family Trust before accepting representation? Yes. Did you request historical probate documents? I did. Were those requests related to ongoing legal administration? They were. Richard answered every question carefully, never volunteering more than necessary. Rebecca never argued. She simply built a record. Near the end, she produced the forged beneficiary acknowledgement. Have you seen this document before? Richard examined it briefly. No. Did Mrs. Harper provide it to you? I cannot discuss attorney-client communications. Rebecca nodded. I understand. No further questions. Outside the conference room, Bradley finally asked, Why stop there? Rebecca smiled. Because I learned what I needed. What? He didn't deny the trust. He didn't deny the probate requests. And he didn't authenticate that signature. She closed her notebook. Sometimes what people don't say becomes evidence, too. 2 days later, the forensic document examiner delivered the preliminary findings. Dr. Melissa Grant had spent 25 years analyzing questioned handwriting for state and federal courts. She spread enlarged photographs across the table, known samples from Julia, the questioned acknowledgement, comparison overlays, microscopic stroke analysis. Bradley watched silently. Melissa pointed with a pencil. These are Julia's authentic signatures. She indicated another page. This is the questioned signature. What do you see? Rebecca asked. Melissa answered confidently. Natural signatures develop unconscious rhythm. This one doesn't. She enlarged several letters. The hesitation marks. The inconsistent pressure. The lifted pen strokes. She looked directly at Rebecca. My preliminary opinion is that this signature was probably simulated. Julia closed her eyes. She had expected the answer. Hearing it still hurt. Melissa continued. I'll complete a full report. But I'm comfortable saying this deserves judicial review. Rebecca thanked her. Another piece, another objective opinion. Still no accusations. Only evidence. Wednesday brought another development. Great Lakes Community Bank responded to Rebecca's subpoena. The bank refused to release the safe deposit contents without additional court authorization. However, it confirmed something significant. The box remained active. Its annual rental had been continuously renewed, without interruption, for 29 years. Rebecca looked at Bradley. That matters. Why? Because if the trust documents aren't produced voluntarily, she tapped the bank response. We now have probable grounds to ask the judge to open the box. Bradley thought about the brass key resting inside his desk drawer. 29 years. Waiting. Perhaps every answer had been sitting behind one steel door the entire time. Thursday afternoon, Julia received an unexpected voicemail. It was Evelyn. Her voice sounded exhausted. Julia. A long pause followed. Please stop this. Another pause. You don't understand what you're doing. The message ended without another word. Julia listened twice, then quietly handed the phone to Bradley. He replayed it once. Nothing threatening, nothing explicit, only fear. Not fear of Bradley, not fear of lawyers, fear of what the documents might reveal. That evening, Rebecca filed another motion. This one requested immediate preservation of all trust records, financial ledgers correspondence, and the contents of Safe Deposit Box 114B, pending further court proceedings. As Bradley left her office, Rebecca looked at him. When this reaches the judge, she paused. Everything changes. Bradley nodded. I know. No. Rebecca's voice grew serious. I don't think you do. She placed one hand on the growing stack of evidence. Until now. Now we've been collecting pieces. She looked directly at him. The next hearing determines whether those pieces become admissible evidence. And once that happens, she glanced toward the courtroom visible through the office window across the street. Now no one controls the truth anymore except the records themselves. The first evidentiary hearing took place on a cool Tuesday morning in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. Bradley arrived 20 minutes early. Not because he was nervous, because punctuality eliminated unnecessary variables. Rebecca Lawson stood near the courtroom entrance reviewing a thick binder. Nathan Brooks sat beside her with several sealed financial reports. Julia remained unusually quiet. She wore a navy suit Bradley had bought for her years earlier when she interviewed for her non-profit position. She looked toward the courtroom doors. I never imagined I'd be here. Bradley gently squeezed her hand. We're here because you asked for answers. She nodded. I know. Across the hallway, Evelyn arrived with Richard Sloan and another litigation attorney. She looked older than she had only weeks before. Her recovery from surgery had progressed physically. Emotionally, the strain showed. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. She glanced toward Julia. For just a moment, mother and daughter looked at each other. Neither spoke. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Case number 24CV4176. Everyone entered. Judge Helen Whitaker presided from the bench with a calm, measured presence. She reviewed the preliminary filings before speaking. This hearing concerns discovery disputes involving the Harper Family Trust. She looked toward Rebecca. Counsel? Rebecca stood. Your Honor, we seek production of original trust records, beneficiary notices, financial accountings, and access to safe deposit box 114B. Richard Sloane rose immediately. We object. The requests exceed what is reasonably necessary. Judge Whittaker looked over her glasses. I'll decide that. She turned back toward Rebecca. Proceed. Rebecca began with documentation rather than argument. Every exhibit had been certified, every page numbered, every source identified. Hospital records, probate records, mailing logs, certified correspondence, the unopened beneficiary letter. Each document entered the record one at a time. Bradley admired her discipline. Nothing dramatic, no raised voices, only evidence. Rebecca approached the witness stand. The petitioner calls Susan Keller. Susan calmly testified about Whitmore and Associates' mailing procedures. She explained how certified letters were logged, how signatures were recorded, how recipient representatives could legally accept mail. Rebecca displayed the original ledger. Is this the record you maintained? It is. Does it accurately reflect 3 certified mailings to Julia Harper? Yes. Richard cross-examined politely. Mrs. Keller, can you testify that Julia herself failed to receive those letters? No. So you don't know who ultimately opened them? Correct. Richard nodded. No further questions. Bradley appreciated the exchange. Both answers were truthful. The court now understood exactly what Susan could and could not prove. The second witness was Dr. Melissa Grant. She carried enlarged handwriting comparisons into the courtroom. Rebecca asked simple questions. How long have you examined questioned documents? 25 years. Approximately how many cases? More than 1,800. Melissa explained handwriting analysis in careful language. She avoided certainty where certainty did not exist. Then Rebecca displayed the disputed acknowledgement. In your professional opinion, was this signature naturally written by Julia Harper? Melissa answered clearly. My opinion is that it was probably simulated. Richard stood immediately. Objection. Foundation. Judge Whittaker nodded. Explain your methodology. Melissa spent nearly 20 minutes describing pen pressure, stroke sequence, line quality, natural variation, microscopic hesitation. By the end of her testimony, the courtroom had received an education rather than an accusation. Richard cross-examined carefully. Can handwriting experts ever disagree? Yes. Can you state your opinion with absolute certainty? No expert should. What level of confidence do you hold? A high professional probability. Richard thanked her. Again, no theatrics. Only competing legal standards. After a short recess, Nathan Brooks testified. His role differed completely. Rebecca asked him to explain only publicly verifiable financial patterns. Nathan projected simplified charts onto courtroom monitors. Annual trust expenses, property acquisitions, administrative costs. He carefully avoided speculation. Then Rebecca asked, Mr. Brooks, did you identify annual trustee expenses? Yes. Did you identify annual beneficiary acknowledgments? No. What significance does that have? Nathan answered cautiously. It creates an inconsistency requiring explanation. Richard objected again. Calls for legal conclusion. Sustained, Judge Whittaker ruled. Nathan immediately rephrased. The records appear incomplete. That answer remained. Bradley watched Julia, listening intently. She wasn't searching for someone to blame anymore. She simply wanted to understand what had happened. Late in the afternoon, Rebecca called Bradley himself. He walked to the witness stand without hesitation. After taking the oath, Rebecca began. State your occupation. Structural engineer. Did you initiate this investigation? No. What initiated your interest? My mother-in-law's statement outside her hospital room. Richard objected. Hearsay. Rebecca nodded. I'm not offering it for the truth of the statement. Only to explain subsequent actions. Judge Whitaker allowed the limited testimony. Bradley described his investigation exactly as it had occurred. No exaggeration, no opinions, only chronology, hospital billing, public records, probate archives, financial consultation, certified mail logs. When Rebecca finished, Richards approached. Mr. Foster? Yes. You are not an attorney. No. You're not a forensic accountant. No. You're not a handwriting expert. No. So much of your investigation depended upon other professionals. Yes. Richard smiled slightly. And you trusted their expertise. I relied upon documented evidence. The answer lingered in the courtroom. Richard changed direction. You paid approximately $187,000 for Mrs. Harper's surgery. I did. Would you agree that paying such a large amount gave you a personal interest in her financial affairs? Bradley answered immediately. No. Richard raised an eyebrow. No. I paid because she needed surgery. Not because I expected anything in return? Several people in the courtroom looked toward Bradley. His tone had remained completely even. Richard tried again. You never expected reimbursement? No. You never asked for ownership of any trust? No. You never sought financial benefit? No. Richard paused. No further questions. As Bradley stepped down, Rebecca quietly smiled. His credibility had remained intact. The final witness of the day surprised everyone. Richard Sloan called Evelyn Harper. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. Evelyn took the oath with trembling hands. Richard's questions remained gentle. Mrs. Harper, did you love your husband? Yes. Did his death devastate your family? Yes. Did you always act in what you believed were Julia's best interests? Evelyn hesitated, then quietly answered, yes. Rebecca stood for cross-examination. She approached slowly. Mrs. Harper, you served as trustee. Correct. Yes. You understood trustees owe fiduciary duties. Yes. Rebecca handed Evelyn the unopened beneficiary letter. Had you seen this before? Evelyn looked down. I don't remember. Rebecca placed the certified mailing log beside it. 3 notices were sent. Do you dispute that too? No. Rebecca produced another exhibit, the trust agreement, highlighted in yellow. She read aloud. Annual financial reports shall be delivered directly to the beneficiary upon reaching 18 years of age. She looked back at Evelyn. Did you personally ensure Julia received those reports? Silence. The courtroom became completely still. Judge Whitaker looked towards the witness. You may answer. Evelyn's hands tightened around the edge of the witness stand. She swallowed. Don't know. Rebecca waited. No pressure, no interruption, just silence. Finally, Evelyn whispered, I handled everything myself. Rebecca nodded once. No further questions. Those 5 words echoed through the courtroom far longer than anyone expected. I handled everything myself. When court adjourned for the day, Judge Whitaker issued several oral rulings. The forensic handwriting report would be admitted provisionally. The mailing records would remain evidence. The financial reconstruction would be considered for limited purposes. Most importantly, she addressed the disputed trust records. The court finds sufficient factual basis to compel a full accounting. She looked directly at Richard Sloane. Mrs. Harper shall produce complete trust ledgers, annual reports correspondence, and all remaining fiduciary records within 14 days. Richard requested additional time. Denied. He requested reconsideration. Denied. Then the judge delivered one final order. Regarding safe deposit box 114B, everyone in the courtroom looked up. The court finds reasonable grounds to preserve its contents. She signed the order before continuing. The box shall be sealed immediately. No contents may be removed. Pending judicial inspection. Bradley remained expressionless. Inside, however, he understood the significance. For nearly 3 decades, whatever rested inside that safe deposit box had remained beyond anyone's reach. Now, for the first time since Michael Harper's death, the court itself would decide when it would finally be opened. The 14-day deadline expired without complete compliance. Rebecca Lawson had expected as much. On the 15th morning, she filed a motion notifying the court that the accounting produced by Evelyn Harper was incomplete. Several years of records had been included. Several years had not. The missing periods happened to coincide with the years immediately following Julia's 18th birthday. Bradley studied the submission in Rebecca's office. "What does that tell you?" Rebecca answered carefully. "Only that records are missing." "Not why?" "Not yet." She refused to speculate. That discipline had carried them this far. Judge Helen Whitaker scheduled another hearing for the following week. This one focused on only one issue: the accounting. Nothing else. No witnesses would discuss family relationships. No one would debate motives. The court wanted financial records, complete financial records, nothing less. 3 days before the hearing, Nathan Brooks finished reviewing every document Evelyn had produced. His office wall displayed a revised financial timeline. Blue represented verified transactions. Gray represented missing documentation. Red represented unexplained transfers. Bradley stood quietly beside him. Nathan pointed toward the center of the chart. "This is where everything changes." "What happened?" "The trust continued earning investment income." Bradley nodded. So the money didn't disappear." Nathan clicked another report onto the screen. Property values, rental income, dividend statements, insurance reimbursements. Every category showed consistent growth. Nathan looked at Bradley. Even after normal expenses, the trust should have increased significantly in value. Instead, Nathan highlighted another column. "It barely moved." Bradley frowned. "Meaning?" "Money left." "Repeatedly." "Can you prove where it went?" "Not yet. But I can prove something else." Nathan enlarged a ledger entry. Trust administration expense. Amount $248,000. Supporting documentation, none. Then another. Professional services. Amount $317,000. No invoices. No contracts. No explanations. Another. Asset management fee. Amount $412,000. Again, no supporting records. Nathan folded his arms. "That's nearly $1 million. Bradley looked at the screen. "And there are dozens more." Nathan nodded. "Exactly." By the end of the reconstruction, unexplained administrative expenses exceeded $4 million over 29 years. No accusation accompanied the figure. Only mathematics. Rebecca reviewed Nathan's report that afternoon. She remained silent until reaching the final page. "This is strong." Nathan shook his head. "No." "It's incomplete." Rebecca smiled. "Which is exactly why it's strong." Bradley understood. The report didn't claim fraud. It documented unanswered questions. Courts preferred questions supported by records over dramatic accusations. On the morning of the hearing, Great Lakes Community Bank sent a representative to the courthouse. Karen Ellis carried a sealed affidavit. Rebecca reviewed it before handing copies to opposing counsel. Richard Sloan read it twice. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Judge Whitaker took the bench. "We're here regarding compliance with the court's accounting order." Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, the accounting remains materially deficient." She presented Nathan's reconstruction, one exhibit after another. Investment summaries, property revenues, administrative withdrawals, missing invoices, missing annual reports, missing beneficiary correspondence. Nathan testified briefly. He explained only objective calculations. Every dollar appearing on his charts came directly from produced records. Nothing had been estimated, unless clearly labeled as such. Richard Sloan cross-examined. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yes." "Can administrative expenses legitimately vary?" "Certainly." "Can trusts hire professionals?" "Yes." "So large expenses aren't automatically improper?" "No." Nathan paused. "They simply require documentation." Richard nodded. "No further questions." That answer remained in the record. Judge Whitaker turned toward Evelyn. "Mrs. Harper, you've reviewed these exhibits?" "Yes." "Can you explain why invoices supporting these expenditures were not produced?" Evelyn looked toward Richard Sloan before answering. "I don't have them." "Were they destroyed?" "I don't know." "Were they ever created?" Silence. Judge Whitaker repeated the question. "Were they ever created?" Evelyn slowly lowered her eyes. "I don't remember." The courtroom remained quiet. The judge made several notes. Rebecca rose once more. "Your Honor, we request appointment of an independent fiduciary." Richard objected immediately. "Extraordinary remedy." Rebecca nodded. "So are 29 years of incomplete trust records." Judge Whitaker asked a single question. "Mr. Sloan, if complete records exist, where are they?" Richard remained professional. "We continue searching." "How long have you been searching?" "Several weeks." Judge Whitaker looked at the calendar. "Mrs. Harper served as trustee for nearly 3 decades." She paused. "The court finds continued delay unreasonable." After a brief recess, she announced her ruling. "The court appoints retired fiduciary administrator James Holloway as independent reviewer. His authority would include reviewing every financial account connected to the trust. Every investment, every property, every banking relationship, every retained document. He would report directly to the court. Neither party could limit his access." Bradley looked toward Rebecca. She simply nodded. This was the breakthrough they had hoped for. Not a finding of liability, an independent examination. Exactly what the evidence justified. The following week, James Holloway began his review. His reputation stretched across 4 decades. Neither Rebecca nor Richard had chosen him. The court had. That independence mattered. James requested thousands of pages within his first 48 hours. Bank statements, brokerage records, tax filings, insurance policies, property management agreements. The requests were comprehensive. By the 4th day, another issue emerged. Several bank statements referenced an account never disclosed during discovery. Rebecca immediately notified the court. Richard Sloan appeared genuinely surprised. "I was unaware of this account." Judge Whitaker ordered immediate production. 3 days later, the records arrived. Nathan reviewed them first. He called Bradley immediately. "I think we've found the missing link." Bradley arrived within an hour. Nathan displayed the account history. The account belonged neither to Evelyn personally nor to the trust. Instead, it belonged to a management company. Harper Asset Administration, LLC. Bradley recognized the name. One of the companies Nathan had identified weeks earlier. "What does it do?" Nathan answered. On paper, it manages trust-owned properties. And in reality, Nathan enlarged several transactions. Nearly every unexplained administrative expense flowed through this account before being distributed elsewhere. Not into Evelyn's personal checking account, not directly, into investment purchases, property improvements, additional business entities. Everything remained inside an expanding network of controlled assets. Bradley examined the flowchart carefully. So the money wasn't disappearing. No. It was moving. Nathan nodded. Exactly. The trust kept paying. The assets kept growing. But the beneficiary... He stopped speaking. Bradley finished the sentence. They never received complete reports. Nathan leaned back. That's what the records suggest. No accusation, only records. James Holloway submitted his preliminary report to the court 4 days later. The document filled nearly 100 pages. Its conclusion occupied only 2 paragraphs. The trust accounting cannot presently be reconciled using the records provided. Additional documentation remains necessary before fiduciary compliance can be determined. Judge Whitaker scheduled one final evidentiary phase. Before ending the hearing, she addressed both legal teams. The purpose of this proceeding has never been punishment. It is accountability. She looked directly at Evelyn. When a fiduciary accepts responsibility for another person's financial interests. Complete transparency is not optional. Court adjourned. As everyone prepared to leave, Julia remained seated. She stared at the empty witness stand. Bradley quietly sat beside her. She spoke without looking at him. My whole childhood. I thought we were barely surviving. Bradley listened. If there really was enough money, she paused. Why did Dad want a trust? Bradley answered honestly. I think he wanted to make sure you were protected. Julia nodded slowly. And now, Bradley looked toward the courtroom doors where attorneys carried boxes of evidence into the hallway. Now the court is making sure his wishes are finally understood. Outside reporters had begun gathering near the courthouse steps after learning an independent fiduciary had been appointed in the long-dormant Harper Trust. Neither Bradley nor Julia spoke to them. They simply walked past the cameras together. The evidence no longer belonged to public opinion, it belonged to the record. And for the first time since Michael Harper's death, nearly 3 decades earlier, every remaining question would be answered not by memories, but by documents. 3 weeks later, the courtroom looked different. Not because the furniture had changed, because the uncertainty had. James Holloway's final report rested on every attorney's table. 183 pages, 4 appendices, thousands of supporting records. Every bank statement had been reconciled, every property traced, every trust account reviewed. Bradley had spent 2 nights reading the report from beginning to end. He treated it the same way he reviewed engineering specifications. Slowly, methodically, twice. James had written in plain language. Whenever documentation existed, he said so. Whenever it did not, he said that too. Nothing was exaggerated, nothing minimized. The conclusion was simple. The Harper Family Trust had remained financially healthy throughout its existence. The investments had grown steadily. The real estate portfolio had appreciated substantially. The beneficiary had not received the annual reports required by the trust agreement. Numerous administrative expenses could not be fully documented because supporting invoices no longer existed. The report did not accuse anyone of theft. It did not speculate about motives. It merely stated that the trustee had failed to maintain the level of documentation required under Ohio fiduciary standards. Judge Helen Whitaker entered precisely at 9 o'clock. Everyone stood. After reviewing several procedural matters, she addressed the courtroom. The court has received the independent fiduciary's report. She looked toward James Holloway. Mr. Holloway, do you stand by your findings? I do. Rebecca Lawson rose. Your Honor, the petitioner has no objection to the report. Richard Sloane stood next. The respondent accepts the report's factual findings. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. For the first time since the litigation began, neither side disputed the evidence. Only the legal consequences remained. Rebecca approached the podium. Your Honor, the issue before the court is no longer whether required records were missing. That question has been answered. The issue is how the trust should now be administered. She requested 3 remedies: appointment of a permanent independent trustee, delivery of complete financial disclosures to Julia, judicial supervision until the transition was complete. Nothing more. No request for punitive damages. No request for sanctions. Richard Sloane responded calmly. Mrs. Harper recognizes that documentation should have been better maintained. He glanced briefly toward Evelyn. She also recognizes that continued independent administration serves everyone's interests. Bradley noticed something remarkable. The argument had changed completely. Weeks earlier, the case centered on denial. Now it centered on correction. Judge Whitaker looked toward Evelyn. Mrs. Harper, you've heard the recommendations. Do you wish to say anything? Evelyn slowly stood. Her hands trembled slightly. For several moments she remained silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost fragile. I loved my husband. No one interrupted. I loved my daughter. She looked toward Julia. I truly believed, she paused, that protecting everything myself was the safest choice. Another pause. I stopped trusting lawyers. I stopped trusting banks. I eventually stopped trusting everyone. She lowered her eyes. I convinced myself that if I controlled everything, nothing else could ever be taken away. The courtroom remained completely still. Evelyn continued. I never meant to hurt Julia. But somewhere along the way, Dearge, protecting the trust became more important than remembering who it belonged to. Julia quietly wiped away a tear. Bradley did not move. He understood something important. An explanation was not the same as an excuse. Judge Whitaker nodded respectfully. Thank you, Mrs. Harper. She reviewed her notes before announcing the court's decision. The court finds that Mrs. Harper failed to fulfill certain fiduciary obligations required under the governing trust documents. She paused. However, the independent review found no reliable evidence that trust assets were converted to Mrs. Harper's personal ownership. Bradley had expected that conclusion. The money had remained within the trust structure. Poor administration. Incomplete documentation, not proven personal theft, Judge Whitaker continued. The court therefore orders the following. The Harper Family Trust shall immediately transition to independent professional administration. Mrs. Harper shall resign as trustee. Complete financial disclosures shall be delivered to Julia Harper Foster. Annual reporting shall continue under court supervision for the next 24 months. She signed the order. The petition is granted. No applause followed, no celebration, only quiet relief. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited again. Rebecca briefly addressed them. This case demonstrates the importance of fiduciary transparency. She refused additional questions. Bradley and Julia slipped through a side exit. Neither wanted publicity. They drove in silence until Julia finally spoke. I don't know how to feel. Bradley nodded. You don't have to decide today. She'd looked out the passenger window. I wanted answers. You found them. They don't make me happy. They weren't supposed to. That evening, they returned home together. For the first time in months, Bradley carried no boxes of documents into his office, no new evidence, no new court filings, only the signed judicial order. He placed it inside a filing cabinet, locked the drawer, turned off the light. The investigation was over. The healing had not yet begun. 2 days later, James Holloway invited Julia to his office. He spent nearly 3 hours explaining the trust, investment accounts, rental properties, tax obligations, future distributions, everything her father had intended. Every question received an answer supported by documents. Nothing remained hidden. When the meeting ended, James handed Julia a leather portfolio. "These belong to you." She opened it carefully. Inside rested annual reports reaching back almost 3 decades, some originals, some reconstructed from surviving records. She ran her fingers across the earliest report. The date matched the year she turned 18. She looked at James. "I should have received these." "Yes." "I never did." "I know." She quietly closed the portfolio. "I'll read every page. I believe your father hoped you would." That weekend, Julia asked Bradley to visit the cemetery. Michael Harper's grave rested beneath a large maple tree outside Columbus. Fresh flowers already stood beside the headstone. Someone had visited recently. Julia knelt quietly. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." The words were not directed toward Bradley, nor toward Evelyn. They belonged to the father she barely remembered. Bradley stood a respectful distance away. When Julia finally rose, she slipped her hand into his. "Thank you." He looked at her. "For what?" "For never asking me to hate my mother," Bradley answered softly. "Hate doesn't solve anything." They walked back toward the parking lot together. Across the cemetery, sunlight filtered through the trees. The months of investigation had uncovered records, court orders, financial histories, forgotten letters. But Bradley understood that none of those things alone had restored the family. What restored it was something much quieter. The truth no longer belonged to whispers in hospital hallways. It belonged to open records, honest conversations, and choices made in daylight. As they reached the car, Bradley glanced once more toward the maple tree. For the first time since overhearing Evelyn's words outside the hospital room, he felt no need to keep asking questions. The evidence had answered them. Now life could finally move forward. Autumn arrived quietly. The legal files that had once covered Bradley Foster's dining room table now fit inside a single filing cabinet. The court proceedings had ended. The trust had transitioned to independent administration. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, every required report reached its intended recipient, Julia. One afternoon, a large envelope arrived by certified mail. Bradley watched as Julia smiled at the irony. "This one actually made it to me." She signed the receipt herself. Inside was her first official annual trust report prepared by James Holloway's firm. Every investment, every property, every expense, every distribution clear, complete, transparent. Julia spent the evening reading every page. Not because she cared about the numbers alone, because every document represented something she had been denied for most of her adult life. The right to know. When she finished, she closed the binder and looked at Bradley. "I finally understand what Dad wanted." Bradley asked quietly, "What was that?" She smiled softly. "Not money. Responsibility." Several weeks later, James invited Julia to tour one of the trust's oldest properties. It was a modest apartment building outside Columbus. Nothing luxurious, nothing extravagant. Just a well-maintained brick building that had quietly generated steady income for decades. James explained that Michael Harper had deliberately chosen stable investments instead of risky ones. He wanted something that would still be here when Julia was grown. Bradley walked beside Julia as they toured the property. Everything suddenly felt different. Not because of its value, because it no longer represented mystery, only stewardship. Julia eventually decided to keep every property. She refused suggestions to sell everything immediately. Instead, she established a long-term plan with independent financial advisors. Part of the annual income would continue maintaining the investments. Part would support local education scholarships. Another portion would create emergency grants for families facing catastrophic medical expenses. When Bradley asked why she had chosen that final program, she smiled. Because no family should ever have to wonder whether they can afford life-saving surgery. He understood immediately. Months earlier, he had written a check without expecting anything in return. He would have done it again. Knowing the truth had never changed that. Winter arrived with unexpected news. Rebecca Lawson called one afternoon. "I thought you'd like to know." "What happened?" "The court officially closed supervision. So soon, there were no issues. The independent trustee filed every report on time." The judge was satisfied. Bradley thanked her. Before hanging up, Rebecca added one final thought. "You know, I've handled trust disputes for over 20 years. Bradley laughed quietly. "I imagine you've seen everything." "Almost. But very few cases end with people choosing transparency over revenge." After the call ended, Bradley reflected on everything that had happened. He had begun searching because of a single sentence overheard outside a hospital room. "Leave him before he learns the truth." At the time, those words had sounded like the beginning of a betrayal. In a way they were, but not the betrayal he had imagined. There had been no secret affair, no hidden second family, no elaborate scheme to steal his money. Instead, there had been something slower, more ordinary, more dangerous. Years of fear, years of secrecy, years of one person convincing herself that protecting information was the same as protecting the people she loved. The truth had been buried not by one dramatic lie, but by hundreds of quiet decisions, each one easier than the last. Until no one remembered where honesty had ended. Just before Christmas, Julia received another phone call. It was Evelyn. Their conversations had been infrequent since the court's ruling. Sometimes they lasted only a few minutes. Sometimes they ended in uncomfortable silence. This time, Evelyn asked a simple question. "Would you come over?" Julia looked at Bradley. He nodded. "I'll wait here." "No." Julia reached for his hand. "I'd like you to come with me." They arrived shortly before sunset. Evelyn opened the door herself. Her health had improved considerably. She moved more confidently now. The surgery Bradley had funded had given her exactly what the doctors had hoped for: more time. She invited them inside. On the coffee table rested a small wooden box, older than anything Bradley had seen in her house before. Evelyn carefully opened it. Inside were photographs: Michael's wristwatch, his wedding ring, a collection of handwritten letters, and one sealed envelope. Across the front, in faded blue ink, were 4 words: "For Julia when ready." Julia looked up. "I've never seen this." "I know," Evelyn answered. "I should have given it to you years ago." She handed the envelope to her daughter. "I wasn't ready." Julia carefully broke the seal. Inside rested only a single handwritten page. Michael's handwriting was unmistakable. Julia read silently. Tears slowly filled her eyes. When she finished, she handed the letter to Bradley. He hesitated. "I don't think this is for me." Julia smiled. "It is now." Bradley read quietly. Michael had written the letter only weeks before his death. He spoke about ordinary things, fishing trips he hoped to take someday, birthdays he knew he would probably miss, the kind of man he hoped Julia would marry. Near the end, one paragraph caught Bradley's attention. "If someone ever tries to protect you by hiding the truth, remember this. Love grows stronger in the light. Secrets only grow stronger in the dark." Bradley folded the letter carefully and handed it back. No one spoke for several moments. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "I'm sorry." Not dramatically, not defensively, simply honestly. "I'm sorry for every year I thought control was the same as love." Julia looked at her mother. "I can't change the past. I know. But I don't want to lose any more years." Evelyn began to cry. So did Julia. Bradley quietly stepped outside onto the porch. Some moments belonged only to them. Snow had begun falling. Small flakes drifted through the evening air. He stood there alone until the front door opened. Julia joined him. "Everything okay?" She nodded. "It will take time." "I know. But I think today was the first real beginning." They drove home beneath a sky filled with winter stars. No investigators followed them. No anonymous letters waited in the mailbox. No hidden ledgers remained to uncover. The mystery had ended. Life had not. Several months later, Bradley returned to the same hospital where everything had begun. Not as a patient, not as a family member. He had been invited to speak at a fundraising event supporting emergency surgery assistance for families in financial crisis. Standing at the podium, he looked across the room. Doctors, nurses, former patients, families. He spoke for only a few minutes. He never mentioned the lawsuit. He never mentioned the trust. He simply said, "Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't money. It's choosing to do the right thing before you know how the story ends." The audience applauded politely. Bradley stepped away from the microphone. Julia met him near the exit. She slipped her hand into his, ready to go home. As they walked outside together, Bradley looked back once at the hospital entrance where months earlier he had overheard the sentence that changed everything. The words themselves had never been the ending. They had only been the beginning of a journey toward something far more valuable than an inheritance, the truth. And once the truth finally belonged to everyone, it no longer had the power to divide them. It finally had the chance to heal them. Every life eventually presents us with a choice between fear and truth. Fear tells us to hide to control, to keep secrets, because we believe we are protecting the people we love. But the truth has a remarkable way of finding the light, no matter how long it has been buried. In this story, Bradley never searched for wealth, revenge, or victory. He searched for honesty. Julia never fought to become rich. She fought to understand her father's legacy. And in the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't the trust fund or the properties. It was the freedom that comes when the truth is no longer hidden. Evelyn's mistakes remind us that good intentions can still cause deep wounds when they are built on secrecy instead of trust. Real love doesn't grow through control. It grows through openness, accountability, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths together. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it allows us to stop letting the past decide our future. Whatever challenges you're facing today, remember, this integrity may not bring immediate rewards, but it builds a life that can withstand every storm. And when you choose kindness without expecting anything in return, just as Bradley did, you often discover that the greatest victories are the ones no amount of money can ever buy. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone in your own life, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your feelings or the lesson that resonated with you most in the comments below. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about family resilience and the power of truth, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications